The first time I saw my stepfather's face that night, I didn't see guilt. I saw confidence. That was the part one still remember. Not his excuses. Not even the moment everyone finally understood the truth. It was the confidence. The way he sat at the head of my father's old dining table, wearing the watch my father gave him before he passed away, acting like he owned every piece of the life my family had built. He looked around the room like a king inspecting his kingdom. And nobody knew that 24 hours earlier, I had discovered the one document that would bring everything crashing down. Nobody knew that the man who spent 8 years slowly removing me from my own family's story had unknowingly left behind the evidence that would expose him, including him. My name was on the inheritance papers, but according to the document sitting in front of him that night, it wasn't supposed to be anymore. My signature had been changed. My rights had been transferred, and my father's final wishes had been rewritten like they were nothing more than a rough draft. I remember holding that paper in my hands and feeling something inside me go completely quiet. Not rage, not panic, just silence. Because sometimes betrayal is not loud. Sometimes it walks into your home wearing a familiar face. Sometimes it pours you coffee in the morning. Sometimes it tells you, "I'm doing this because I love you." And then you discover it was building a trap around you piece by piece. My stepfather, Daniel, had spent years convincing everyone that I was irresponsible, that I was too emotional, that I couldn't handle my father's business, that I needed someone more experienced to make decisions for me. And slowly, almost invisibly, he started removing me from my own life. First, he removed my voice, then my choices, then my place in the family. But what he never knew was that my father had prepared for a day exactly like this. A day when someone would try to erase his daughter's name. A day when someone would mistake kindness for weakness. The night before that family dinner, I was sitting alone in my car outside a law office, staring at a folder on the passenger seat. Inside that folder was a copy of a legal agreement dated March 14, 2018. A document Daniel had never seen. A document worth $480,000. A document that proved everything he had done was built on a lie. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Not because I was afraid of him. Because I finally understood something painful. The person who destroyed my family wasn't a stranger. It was someone my father trusted. Someone my mother defended. Someone I called family. And the hardest part? I had spent years trying to earn the approval of someone who had already decided to betray me. The next evening, I walked into that dining room knowing something nobody else knew. I knew the truth. And I knew I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't need revenge. I only needed to let the facts speak. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't a scream. It's a document. It's a date. It's a signature. It's proof. And when Daniel finally realized what I had brought with me, the confidence disappeared from his face. But before I tell you what happened at that dinner table, you need to understand how we got there. Because betrayal like this doesn't happen overnight. It starts with small changes, small excuses, small moments where someone moves one piece on the board and convinces everyone nothing happened. And by the time you notice, the entire structure has changed. The foundation is already damaged. My father always told me something when I was young. Emily, people reveal themselves in the little things. Pay attention. I never understood what he meant. Not until I was sitting across from the man who tried to erase me. Not until I realized my father had been preparing me for that exact moment all along. Because Daniel thought he was writing the final chapter of my family's story. He didn't know. I had already found the missing pages. My father used to say that a family is like a house. Not because of the walls. Not because of the furniture. Because of the foundation. You can repaint a room, he would tell me. But if the foundation cracks, eventually everyone feels it. When I was a child, I thought he was talking about actual houses. My father loved fixing things. Broken chairs, old engines, loose door hinges. Anything that had a problem, he believed it could be repaired if someone cared enough to understand the damage. That was the kind of man he was. Patient, reliable, the person everyone called when life became complicated. And for most of my childhood, I believed our family would always stay that way. My father, Michael, raised me after my biological mother passed away when I was 9. It was just the two of us for many years. Every Saturday morning, We would drive to the small hardware store near our neighborhood. He would buy supplies for his renovation projects, and I would sit on the old wooden bench outside while he explained everything he was doing. I still remember one thing he always carried in his pocket: a small silver measuring tape. It was scratched. The numbers were faded, but he treated it like it was valuable. One day, I asked him why he kept using that old thing when he could easily buy a new one. He smiled and said, "Because this one helped me build my first home. Some things are valuable because of what they witnessed." I didn't know it then, but years later, that same idea would help me understand Daniel. Because Daniel didn't destroy my family in one dramatic moment. He did it slowly, quietly, like someone removing bricks from a wall when nobody was watching. I was 22 when Daniel entered our lives. At first, I liked him. I want to be honest about that. Because the truth is, villains in real life rarely introduce themselves as villains. They don't walk through the door wearing a warning sign. They come carrying flowers. They remember birthdays. They ask about your day. Daniel was charming. He knew exactly what to say and exactly when to say it. When he first met my father, he seemed like the person we had been missing. My father had spent years focusing on work and raising me. He rarely took time for himself. Daniel encouraged him to travel, to relax, to enjoy life. And for the first time in years, I saw my father laughing more. That made me trust him. I thought Daniel was good for him. I thought he was adding something to our family. I didn't realize he was slowly trying to become the person everyone depended on. At first, the changes were small, almost impossible to notice. Daniel started handling my father's appointments, then his paperwork, then business conversations. Whenever I asked my father about something, Daniel would answer before he could. "Michael has been stressed lately," Daniel would say. "I've already taken care of it." At the time, I thought he was being helpful, but later, I realized something. Helpful people support your voice. Controlling people replace it. The first time I felt something was wrong was after my father's company meeting. My father owned a small construction business that he built from nothing. It wasn't a massive corporation. It wasn't famous. But it was his life's work. 25 years of early mornings, late nights, missed vacations, sacrifices. That company represented every difficult choice he had made to give me a better future. After the meeting, I asked him about the new financial documents Daniel had prepared. My father looked surprised. "What documents?" I remember laughing because I thought he was joking. "Daniel said you approved them." My father looked toward the office. Then he looked back at me. And for a second, just 1 second, I saw confusion on his face. That moment stayed with me because my father trusted people, sometimes too much. The next morning, he told me everything was fine. He said Daniel was just helping organize things. He told me not to worry. And because I loved my father, I believed him. Months passed, then years. And little by little, Daniel changed the way people saw me. Not through one big lie, through hundreds of small ones. At family gatherings, he would make comments disguised as jokes. "Emily has a good heart, but business isn't really her thing." Everyone would laugh, including me, because I didn't want to look sensitive. Then another time, "Emily still thinks like a child sometimes. She'll understand when she's older." I was 30 years old, but somehow, around Daniel, I always felt like I had to prove I was an adult. He made decisions without me, then explained them afterward. He excluded me from conversations, then said, "We didn't want to burden you." And the most painful part? Other people started believing him. My relatives began asking Daniel questions about my father's business. Not me. Daniel became the person everyone went through. And slowly, I became a visitor in my own family's story. The biggest change happened after my father became sick. It started with simple things: feeling tired, missing meetings, forgetting small details. The doctors said stress had affected his health. Daniel immediately stepped forward. "I'll handle everything," he said, and everyone praised him. They called him responsible. They called him loyal. Nobody saw what I saw. The way he protected documents from me. The way he changed passwords. The way conversations stopped when I entered the room. One afternoon, I came home early and found Daniel in my father's office. He was holding a folder. When he noticed me, he quickly closed it. "What is that?" I asked. He smiled. A calm smile. The kind that makes you question yourself. "Nothing important." I looked at the folder, then at him. Then why hide it? His expression changed for half a second. Only half a second. But I saw it. Something behind his eyes. Something I couldn't explain. Then he said, "Emily, you need to stop assuming everyone is against you." That sentence hurt more than I expected, because it made me feel like I was the problem. Like asking questions was wrong. Like wanting to know what was happening in my own family made me difficult. 3 weeks later, my father passed away. And after the funeral, Daniel changed completely. The kindness disappeared. The patience disappeared. The mask started cracking. The first thing he said to me after everyone left was, "We need to talk about the future." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How are you?" The future. Like my father's death was a business meeting. He placed a folder on the table. And that was the first time I saw the document. The inheritance agreement. According to Daniel, my father had changed his mind before he died. According to Daniel, everything had been updated. According to Daniel, my father no longer wanted me controlling any part of the company. I stared at the papers. My name was there. My signature was there. But something felt wrong. The handwriting, the date, the wording. Everything looked almost perfect. Almost. And that word mattered. Because almost perfect means someone made a mistake. Daniel leaned back and said, "You need to accept reality, Emily." I looked at him. The man who entered our family years earlier pretending to protect it. The man sitting in my father's chair. The man holding documents that could change my entire life. And for the first time, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him why. I simply said, "Okay." He looked surprised, because he expected a fight. But I wasn't fighting yet. I was listening, because I had learned something from my father. When someone thinks they have already won, they usually stop being careful. And Daniel had just made his biggest mistake. He had shown me the door, but he forgot. I still had the keys. For 3 days after Daniel placed those papers in front of me, I did nothing. At least, that is what he thought. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I didn't tell my relatives that I believed something was wrong. I didn't walk into his office and demand answers. I simply went quiet. And Daniel misunderstood my silence. He thought I had accepted defeat. That was his first mistake. Because silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes silence means someone is finally listening carefully enough to hear the truth. The morning after I saw those inheritance papers, I drove to the oldest place my father and I shared memories. The small storage building behind his first office. It had been closed for almost 2 years. Most people forgot it even existed. But my father never threw anything away. He believed every document, every receipt, every note had a story attached to it. I remember standing outside that building with the old key in my hand. The paint on the door was peeling. The lock was rusty. It looked forgotten. But my father had always told me something. Never judge the value of something by how long it has been sitting quietly. I unlocked the door, and the smell hit me immediately. Old paper, wood, dust, memories. It felt like walking into a frozen moment of my childhood. The shelves were still there. The old filing cabinets. The desk where my father used to review business plans late at night. I stood there for almost 5 minutes without moving. Because suddenly, I wasn't thinking about the money. I wasn't thinking about the company. I was thinking about my father. And how much he trusted me. I started searching through the files slowly. Not because I knew exactly what I was looking for. Because I knew my father. He was organized. Almost painfully organized. Every important document had a place. Every agreement had a copy. Every decision had a reason. After nearly 2 hours, I found a box labeled Future Planning Personal. My heart started beating faster. Inside were old insurance papers, tax documents, business records, and then a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front, not typed, written by hand, my father's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. My fingers froze, because there was only one reason my father would write something directly to me and hide it away. He wanted me to find it at the right time. Not before. Not after. At the right time. Inside the envelope was a letter. The first sentence made me stop breathing for a moment. Emily, if you are reading this, it means something happened that made you question whether I protected your future. I sat down, right there on the dusty floor, and I read every word. My father explained that in 2018, after several disagreements with Daniel about the direction of the company, he created a separate legal protection agreement, a document that would prevent anyone from transferring my inheritance rights without my direct approval. The agreement was signed on March 14, 2018, registered with the family attorney, and stored separately from the main business files. My father knew Daniel was ambitious. He didn't call him dishonest. He didn't accuse him of anything. That wasn't my father. He simply wrote, "Sometimes people who love control don't realize when they cross the line. Good intentions can become dangerous when nobody questions them." Then I reached the final page, the part that changed everything. The agreement stated that any attempt to transfer my inheritance share, alter ownership rights, or remove my legal position without my written approval would automatically trigger a review by an independent legal trustee. And the penalty clause was very specific. If false documentation was submitted, the responsible party could be held personally liable for financial damages. The estimated value? $480,000. I read that number 3 times. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. My father had known. Maybe not everything. Maybe not exactly what would happen. But he knew enough to protect me. I called my father's attorney, Richard. He answered on the second ring. "Emily?" His voice changed immediately, like he knew something was wrong. "I found the agreement," I said. There was silence. A long silence. Then he asked, "Where did you find it?" "In my father's storage office." Another pause. Then Richard said something I will never forget. "Your father asked me to keep that document private unless you needed it." I closed my eyes. "Why didn't he tell me?" Richard sighed. "Because your father hoped you would never need it." That sentence hurt, because it meant my father had prepared for a storm while hoping the sky would stay clear. Richard reviewed the documents Daniel had given me. Within 48 hours, he found the problem. The inheritance papers were not completely fake. That was what made them dangerous. Some information was real. Some signatures were real. Some sections were copied from legitimate documents. But one page had been altered. A single paragraph. The paragraph that removed my decision-making authority. The paragraph that transferred control. The paragraph that changed everything. And there was something else. The date on the altered page was April 2nd, 2024. The problem? My father had been hospitalized on that exact date. He was physically unable to sign anything. The hospital records proved it. He had been under medical supervision. He had not visited any legal office. He had not signed any new agreements. Daniel had made one mistake. He focused so much on making the document look real. He forgot to check whether the timeline was possible. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father died. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. Just peace. Because I finally understood. I wasn't powerless. I had been pushed into a corner, but corners create focus. And Daniel had no idea what I knew. That became my advantage. I decided not to confront him immediately. Richard agreed. "Emily," he said, "the strongest position is not always the loudest one. Let him believe he is ahead." So I did. I continued acting like nothing had changed. I answered Daniel's calls. I attended family meetings. I listened. And the more comfortable he became, the more he revealed. A week later, Daniel called a family dinner. He told everyone it was about moving forward. That phrase bothered me, because people often say moving forward when they want everyone to stop looking backward. The guest list included my aunt, my cousins, several business partners, and Daniel's closest friends. Almost 20 people. A stage. Exactly what he wanted. Public approval. A room full of witnesses. He thought he was going to announce his victory. He didn't know I had already prepared the ending. That evening, before leaving my house, I placed 3 things inside my handbag. The original agreement, the hospital records, and my father's handwritten letter. 3 pieces of paper. 3 pieces of truth. I looked at my reflection before walking out, and I remembered something my father once told me. When you build something strong, you don't need to destroy the person who damaged it. You just need to show everyone where the crack was. I walked into that dinner knowing Daniel believed he had already won, and I let him believe it, because sometimes the biggest mistake people make is celebrating before the final evidence arrives. The restaurant Daniel chose was not accidental. That was something I understood the moment I walked through the doors. He had always been careful about appearances. Everything about him was designed to send a message. The expensive suit, the polished shoes, the confident handshake, the way he stood slightly ahead of everyone else in photographs. Daniel didn't just want to be respected. He wanted to be seen as the person in control. The restaurant was one of those places where people came to celebrate success. High ceilings, large windows, soft lighting, a room where every conversation felt important, the perfect stage. And Daniel had built the entire scene. He believed he was about to announce the final version of my family's future. He just didn't know I had brought the original blueprint. When I entered the private dining room, everyone was already there. My Aunt Linda waved at me. My cousins smiled. Some of my father's old business partners nodded politely. But the room felt different. Not because anyone knew the truth. They didn't. It felt different because I knew the truth. There is a strange feeling that happens when you are surrounded by people who believe a lie. You start noticing every small detail, every expression, every word, every hesitation. I noticed Daniel standing near my father's old business partner, Robert. He was explaining something with confidence. His hands moved as he spoke. He laughed. He looked comfortable, like nothing in the world could touch him. Then he saw me. His smile became wider, too wide. "Emily," he said. Everyone looked over. "Glad you made it." I smiled. "Of course." That was all I said. And for a moment, I saw confusion on his face. Because he expected me to be angry. He expected a confrontation. He expected emotion. But I gave him nothing. Dinner started normally. That was the strange part. People talked about vacations, weather, business, old memories. Someone even told a funny story about my father from years ago. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I was watching Daniel, because I knew eventually he would reveal why he gathered everyone. People like Daniel rarely create a public moment unless they want public approval. And after about 30 minutes, he finally stood up. He tapped his glass. The room became quiet. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he began. His voice was calm, confident. "I know the last few months have been difficult since Michael passed away, but I believe he would want us to focus on the future." There it was. That phrase again. The future. I looked down at my plate, because I already knew what was coming. "I've spent a lot of time organizing everything," Daniel continued, "and I believe I have honored Michael's wishes." I looked around the room. People were listening, trusting him, and I understood why. Because Daniel was good at this. He didn't act like a thief. He acted like a protector. That was what made him dangerous. He picked up a folder, the same kind of folder he had shown me weeks earlier. "I want everyone to understand that this wasn't an easy decision." He paused, then looked directly at me. "My hope is that Emily eventually understands that this was done for the good of the family." There it was. The first move. Not an accusation. Not an attack. A suggestion. A carefully placed idea. He wanted everyone to believe he was sacrificing himself while I was being unreasonable. I stayed quiet. He opened the folder. "My decision-making role in the company will continue temporarily until everything is stabilized." Temporarily. Another interesting word. People use that word when they want control without admitting they want control. "And Emily will receive her inheritance portion according to the updated agreement." A few people nodded. They didn't notice. But I did. He avoided saying my full rights. He avoided explaining the details. He used general words. Because details are dangerous. Details can be checked. Then something happened that I didn't expect. My Aunt Linda looked at me. Not Daniel. Me. She studied my face. She had known my father for 30 years. She knew when something was wrong. "Emily," she said quietly, "is everything okay?" The entire room became still. Daniel immediately answered, "Of course it is. Too fast. Much too fast." Linda looked at him. "I wasn't asking you." That was the first crack. Small, but visible. Daniel smiled. A controlled smile. "Linda, I understand emotions are high right now." Another tactic. Make the other person seem emotional. Make yourself seem reasonable. I had seen him do it many times before. Then he made his biggest mistake. He said, "Michael trusted me to handle things because he knew Emily wasn't ready." The room became silent because that sentence wasn't about business. It was personal. He wasn't protecting my father's company anymore. He was attacking my character. I slowly lifted my eyes. "Not ready for what?" Daniel looked at me. "For responsibility." I nodded. "Interesting." He frowned slightly. "What's interesting?" I placed my hands calmly on the table. "That you keep saying my father wanted this, but you never mentioned the documents he actually signed." The room changed. It was subtle, but everyone felt it. Daniel's expression shifted, only for a second. But I saw it. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted him to feel the same uncertainty I had felt, the same confusion, the same helplessness. Not because I wanted him to suffer, because I wanted the truth to have space to enter the room. I reached into my handbag. I removed the first document, not dramatically, not like a movie, just calmly. I placed it on the table. "This is the legal protection agreement my father created on March 14, 2018. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked at the paper, then at me. "Where did you get that?" His voice was different now. The confidence had weakened. "I found it where my father kept important things." I placed another document beside it. The hospital records from April 2nd, 2024. Daniel stopped moving. "The same date you claim my father signed the updated agreement." Someone at the table whispered. "What?" I continued. "The same day my father was under medical care and unable to sign legal documents." Daniel looked around the room, searching, not for answers, for support. But nobody moved, because the foundation of his story had just cracked. He leaned back. Then he laughed. A small laugh. A nervous laugh. "Emily, you don't understand what you're looking at." There it was. The first defense. Confusion. "I understand enough." "No, you don't." His voice became stronger. "You're making a serious accusation." "I haven't accused you of anything." I looked at him. "I only showed everyone the documents." That sentence bothered him. Because facts are difficult to fight. He changed direction. "Emily, I know you're hurt." There was the manipulation, the soft voice, the emotional angle. "You lost your father. You're grieving. Maybe you're looking for someone to blame." I listened. I really listened. Because years ago, that would have worked. I would have apologized. I would have questioned myself. But not anymore. I looked at him and said, "You know what hurts the most, Daniel?" He waited. "It isn't that you tried to take something from me." The room was silent. "It's that you used my father's trust to do it." For the first time that night, Daniel had no immediate answer. Then my Aunt Linda spoke. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. "Daniel, Michael was my brother." She looked at the documents. "He trusted very few people with his life and his daughter." She looked back at him. "I need you to explain why his final agreement says one thing and yours says another." That was the moment. The moment he realized this wasn't just me anymore. The room was no longer his. The witnesses he invited to celebrate his victory had become witnesses to his collapse. Daniel looked at the papers again. Then he looked at me, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Anger, denial, fear, all fighting for control. But he still had one more move. The one people like him usually save for when everything else fails. The victim. He lowered his voice. "After everything I've done for this family." And then he stopped. His eyes became wet. Fake tears. Perfect timing. A performance. But this time, nobody applauded. Because the audience finally knew the script. I sat there quietly. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. Because across that table was a person who had been part of my family. Someone my father trusted. someone I once welcomed into my home. And that was the saddest part. The truth didn't feel like winning. It felt like finally turning on a light in a room that had been dark for too long. But Daniel still had one question that would reveal whether he truly understood what he had done. He looked at me and asked, "So what happens now?" I looked at the documents, then at him, and I answered calmly, "Now, everyone gets to see the complete story." Daniel always believed the most powerful person in the room was the person holding the information. That was why he collected secrets, why he controlled conversations, why he decided what people knew and what they didn't. For years, he had built his influence the same way someone builds a wall, one brick at a time, one small decision, one hidden conversation, one person convinced that he knew better. But what Daniel never understood was this. A wall built on a weak foundation doesn't fall because someone pushes it. It falls because the cracks were already there. And that night, everyone finally saw them. After I placed the documents on the table, nobody spoke for several seconds. It felt longer than it actually was. 20 people, one room, and complete silence. Daniel looked around, waiting for someone to defend him, someone to say I was wrong, someone to question the evidence. But nobody did. Because facts have a different kind of power. They don't need confidence. They don't need a performance. They don't need a perfect speech. They simply exist. And once people see them, they cannot unsee them. Daniel finally pushed his chair back. "I think this conversation has gone far enough." His voice was colder now. The kindness was gone. The patient family man disappeared. This was the person hidden underneath. The person I had spent years trying to understand. "I don't know what you think you found," he said, "but you are making a serious mistake." I looked at him calmly. "No, Daniel. The mistake was believing nobody would check." That sentence stayed in the room, because that was exactly what happened. He didn't expect investigation. He expected acceptance. He expected everyone to trust his version because he delivered it first. But truth doesn't have to arrive first. It only has to arrive. Richard, my father's attorney, had been sitting quietly at the end of the table. Daniel noticed him, and for the first time that night, I saw real fear. Not anger, not frustration, fear. Because Daniel understood something. This was no longer a family argument. This was no longer a disagreement. There was a legal record, a timeline, a paper trail. Richard opened his folder. "Daniel, before anyone makes another statement, I want to clarify something." Everyone looked toward him. "The agreement dated March 14, 2018 is valid. It was signed by Michael, witnessed, and legally registered." He placed another document on the table. "The amended document you presented contains alterations that were not approved through the required legal process." Daniel interrupted. "That's not true." Richard didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The review has already started. That was the moment Daniel stopped arguing. Because people can argue with emotions. They can argue with opinions. They can argue with memories. But they struggle to argue with procedures. The next 2 weeks changed everything. The investigation moved quickly. The legal team reviewed every document, every signature, every date, every transaction. And slowly, the picture became clear. Daniel had not just attempted to control my inheritance. He had been moving company funds without proper approval. Small amounts. Amounts designed not to attract immediate attention. $4,500. $7,200. $12,000. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would instantly alarm someone. But over 3 years, those small decisions added up. The total amount? $186,700. Money that belonged to the company my father built. Money that belonged to the employees who trusted him. Money that was taken because Daniel believed nobody would look closely. 30 days after the dinner, Daniel was removed from all company decisions. 60 days later, the legal process was complete. The inheritance agreement remained unchanged. My father's original plan stayed exactly as he intended. The company was placed under a temporary management team while everything was reorganized. And the amount Daniel was required to repay? $186,700. Not because I wanted to punish him, because responsibility has a price. My father always believed that. He used to say, If someone breaks what belongs to everyone, fixing it is part of their responsibility. But the hardest part wasn't the money. It wasn't the legal battle. It wasn't watching Daniel lose the control he had spent years building. The hardest part came 3 months later. I was cleaning out my father's office when I found something behind his old bookshelf. A small wooden box. Inside was his old silver measuring tape, the same one he carried when I was a child. Underneath, it was a handwritten note. My name was written on it. I sat down before opening it, because I already knew my father. I knew every word would matter. The note said, "Emily, if you are reading this, something probably happened that made you question whether you were strong enough to handle difficult moments." I smiled through the tears, because that sounded exactly like him. Remember this: strength is not about winning every fight. Strength is knowing when the truth is enough. I held that note for a long time, because my father had understood something I didn't. The goal was never to destroy Daniel. The goal was to protect what was right. 6 months later, I visited the old family house. The same house where Daniel once sat at the head of the table believing he owned everything. The house was quieter now, but it felt peaceful. I walked into my father's office. The walls were empty. The furniture was gone, but the room still felt like him. I placed his measuring tape on the desk. A small object, worth almost nothing financially, but worth everything emotionally, because it reminded me that some things cannot be stolen. Not by lies, not by manipulation, not by betrayal. I sometimes think about Daniel, not with anger, not anymore. I think about how someone can spend years chasing control and still lose everything that actually matters. Because trust is not something you can force. Respect is not something you can fake. And family is not created by a marriage certificate or a shared address. It's created by choices. Every single day. A year after everything happened, I received a letter from Daniel. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It was only 2 pages. No excuses. No explanations. Just an apology. He wrote that he finally understood what he had destroyed. Not the money. Not the company. The relationships. He admitted that he became so focused on proving he deserved power that he forgot what my father actually valued. People. Trust. Family. I don't know if apologies can repair everything. Some damage leaves permanent marks. Like an old house that has been repaired. The walls may stand again, but you remember where the cracks were. Still, I chose forgiveness. Not because what happened was acceptable. Not because I forgot. But because I didn't want Daniel's choices to control my future the way he tried to control my past. Looking back now, I realized something. For years, I thought Daniel took my place in my family. But he didn't. He only convinced me to step away from it. And the moment I stopped asking for permission to belong, I finally understood that I always belonged. The inheritance was never the greatest thing my father left me. It was the lesson. The courage to stand quietly. The patience to collect the truth. The wisdom to know that justice doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with a folder, a signature, a date, a simple piece of evidence that tells the world, this is what really happened. Because in the end, if this story reminded you to know your worth and protect the things that matter, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Real Drama Story, drop a comment, and tell me what you would have done in Emily's place. I will see you in the next one.